Late one night, Jordan moved into a small apartment complex on the edge of town. He'd chosen it for the silence. The halls were dim, the walls a faded yellow, and only a few residents lived there. On his first night, as he unpacked, he heard a strange sound from the apartment above. Footsteps. Not the casual shuffle of someone walking, but long, slow pacing. Back and forth, back and forth. He brushed it off. Maybe the tenant was restless. But every night it was the same. Midnight, footsteps, pacing. Always the same rhythm, as if the person upstairs was measuring the floor. Curiosity clawed at him. One day, Jordan asked the landlord about the tenant upstairs. The landlord gave him a long look and said quietly, "There hasn't been anyone in that apartment for years." Jordan laughed it off, but that night, the pacing grew louder, almost deliberate. Against his better judgment, he went upstairs. The door was locked, dusty, and sealed with a rusty chain. He leaned close. Silence. Then, just as he turned away, he heard a whisper from inside. "I know you're listening now." Jordan stumbled back, heart racing. But here's where the real horror lies. Not in ghosts, but in psychology. There's a documented phenomenon called the frequency illusion. Once you notice something, a sound, a word, a face, your brain starts filtering reality, making that thing seem like it's appearing everywhere, even when it isn't. The mind bends perception. That whisper Jordan heard, that could have been nothing more than pipes, wind, or the creak of wood. But once his brain expected something, it would fill the silence with terror. Jordan never slept in silence again. Every floorboard creak, every gust of wind, became the pacing of someone waiting above him. Jordan lay in bed, the faint moonlight slicing through the blinds, painting his walls in pale silver. His body was still, but his mind raced. Every creak of the building above seemed sharper, heavier, as though deliberate footsteps were pressing down on his ceiling. He told himself it was nothing. Old buildings groaned, pipes shifted, air hissed through vents. But deep down, he knew it wasn't the building. It was him, his brain. And that was far worse. Because once you start listening for something, you can't stop. The first night, he sat upright in bed for hours, convinced he could hear pacing overhead. Slow, steady, back and forth. When he finally drifted into shallow sleep, he dreamed of the whisper he'd heard before. "I know you're listening now." He woke with sweat soaking his sheets and a dull ache behind his eyes, like he'd been awake all along. By the second night, he'd started keeping the TV on for background noise, but that only made things worse. Between the dialogue of the sitcom reruns, between canned laughter and fake applause, he swore he heard it again. The whisper. Just faint enough that he couldn't tell if it was coming from the apartment above, from the hallway, or from inside his own head. Listening. Jordan jolted, grabbed the remote, and turned the volume up until the walls vibrated. But the laughter on screen didn't comfort him. Every burst of sound left too much silence afterward, and silence was the enemy. Silence was where his imagination crawled out and took form. By the third night, he stopped turning on the TV. It didn't matter anymore. The sounds had followed him. He'd be brushing his teeth, the mirror fogging up, when he'd hear what sounded like a faint tap against the ceiling. He'd spit, rinse, and stand still, toothbrush shaking in his hand, listening. It would stop when he moved, only to resume the moment he tried to convince himself it wasn't real. When he ate, the footsteps paced above. When he sat at his desk, trying to scroll through his phone, his eyes would catch the shadows shifting just slightly out of sync with the lights. And when he tried to sleep, the whisper would return. Softer each time, but closer. By the end of the week, Jordan looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin sickly pale. His hands trembled even when he was sitting perfectly still. That's when the dreams began. In them, he was back in the hallway, standing in front of that locked, chained apartment door. The air was heavy, thick, and smelled faintly of mold and dust. The yellow light above flickered in and out, each flash showing the numbers on the door twist into nonsense symbols. He'd lean closer, straining to hear, and the whisper would crawl through the crack again. "I know you're listening now." Except now, the whisper wasn't alone. Behind it came another sound, a low, rattling breath, shallow and broken, like someone was crouched just inside, their lips pressed against the wood. He'd wake up gasping, swearing he could still feel warm air brushing against his ear. Jordan tried to reason with himself. He even looked it up online. Frequency illusion. Once your brain latches onto something, it forces you to notice it everywhere. The whisper wasn't real. The footsteps weren't real. It was his mind. But knowing didn't help. If anything, it made it worse. Because if his brain could do this, if it could make him hear things that weren't there, then how could he trust it at all? One night near the end of the second week, Jordan finally broke. He stood in the hallway again, staring at the chained apartment door above. He didn't even remember walking there. His body had moved on autopilot. His hand hovered near the knob. He knew he shouldn't touch it. He knew nothing good waited inside. But the silence behind that door was unbearable. And then it came. The whisper, clearer than ever. "Come closer." Jordan stumbled back so hard he nearly tripped over himself. His heart thundered in his chest, his breath coming ragged, his ears ringing with the echo. He ran back to his apartment, slammed the door and pressed his back against it, his entire body shaking. That night he didn't sleep at all. He sat in his bed, knees to his chest, eyes locked on the ceiling. He waited for the creaks, the whispers, the footsteps. He told himself that if he stayed awake, maybe he could catch them in the act. Maybe then he'd know if it was real. But nothing came. Just silence. And somehow that was worse, because silence gave his mind room to work. Every second of it stretched longer, heavier, until he swore the air itself had weight. He swore the shadows grew darker in the corners of his room. He swore he wasn't alone. By morning, his body had given out. He passed out on the couch, sunlight spilling across his face, and dreamed again of the door. Only this time, he didn't stop at listening. This time, his dream self reached out, unclipped the chain, and pushed it open. Inside, there was nothing. Just a dark, empty apartment. No furniture, no lights, no people. But the moment his dream self stepped across the threshold, he heard it again. Not from the apartment, from inside his own head. "You're not listening. You're mine." Jordan woke up screaming,